America's Cup. Melted down for silver, it would be worth only about $40. Yet the English who lost the old mug to America in 1851 have spent millions trying to win it back. Americans have spent millions making sure they don't. Whenever a new boat goes after yachting's most coveted prize, whenever someone challenges the American monopoly on the old mug, the response is worldwide. It's a contest that fascinates nearly a third of the world's population. Headlines from New York to London to Tokyo follow the contest blow by blow. It is one of the most highly publicized sports events in the world. But there are no ringside seats. Nobody except crew members ever gets a close-up view of the activity that precedes the series or the infighting that goes on during a race. Throughout the year, preparations are made by closed groups of experts and enthusiasts in as much secrecy as possible. During the races themselves, the spectator fleet is corralled by an overworked Coast Guard and Navy. There is no choice but to stand a mile away from the real activity. Even the closest boat watcher has to rely on binoculars to cover most of a 26-mile course. That shortens the distance by a very little bit. But we can bring the picture closer, here and now. We can do it through the eyes of George O'Day, skipper of the Minotaur in her 1960 Olympics victory, co-skipper of the Easterner during the early '62 America's Cup trials, and later tactical advisor to Weatherly for the Cup defense. Throughout the 1962 season, O'Day used his camera eye to capture the boats and the people who threw their energies into the America's Cup contest. He has given us a unique record, a collection of close-ups designed to take you inside the 12s. George?
Thanks, John. 12-meter class sloops are among the most refined boats ever raced. They're in a select group. Less than 100 have ever been built. 19 of them were made in the United States. One, named Gradle, was made in Australia. The 12s are small compared with the old-timers, but they tower way over a standard 5.5 meter. Weatherly here is number 17 of the 19 U.S. 12s, and she weighs in about 60,000 pounds. The design of a 12 follows pretty rigid rules, but there's room for innovation, and everybody has ideas about what it takes to make one perfect. In 1962, the Australians thought they had done it. There was a chance that their Gradle could turn out near perfect. So on Weatherly, Columbia, and Easterner, we all started by making new boats out of the old ones. It was the only way to defend the Cup. We began reconditioning in winter quarters in Newport, Rhode Island. I went over Chandler Hovey's yacht, Easterner, with co-skipper C. Raymond Hunt, who was also the designer, and Ray decided he wanted to change the lines of the keel itself. In the past 3 years, compounds like epoxy have given us the leeway to mold new shapes. So Easterner traded in her V-shaped keel for a new airfoil. Over on the 1958 Cup defender, Columbia, they did exactly the opposite. The idea was to improve the stability, speed, and tacking ability of the boats. Columbia hoped to do it with a keel like Easterner's. Easterner hoped to do it with a keel like Columbia's.
Like the designers of the competing 12s, naval architect Hunt went over Easterner critically, bit by bit, right down to the hardware and the 33-foot boom. The checkout procedures are strictly scientific. The flex of a mast can only be tested when leveled and subjected to measured amounts of strain.
Yes, and here's how scientific you get. Ray determines the flex by jumping up and down on the mast. This seemed to satisfy him completely. I wasn't quite sure what he learned, but he said it would do the job. Sometimes you have to go by trial and error. When we reworked Easterner, we moved the mast back 18 inches, and then the chain plates were out of place. That tended to close the boat up like an accordion. So we made all new fittings to hold the boat apart. Worked fine. At least the boat got into the water and held together okay. But we ended up rebuilding the mast step completely.
All three of the older 12s had vital changes made in early 1962 to reflect the design ideas of their new skippers and to take advantage of new materials. Many people considered Columbia better left alone, but she got her shorter, sharper keel over the protests of old admirers. And she got new coffee grinder winches that gave her trouble all summer long. And then there was Weatherly, the Henry Mercer syndicate boat. She started with a new skipper, Bus Mossbacker, an old friend and competitor of George O'Day's. And Mossbacker gave his boat a clean sweep reconditioning.
Bus had a working partner, Ed Bainbridge. Ed was assigned by Henry Mercer to be chief naval engineer for Project Weatherly, responsible for every major change in the yacht. Ed did it with complete authority. A tremendous person. In fact, he was more responsible for Weatherly's ultimate success than any other single person except for Bus. Weatherly's major modification was that 2.5 feet were cut off the stern. Sounds minor, but its actual physical effect was tremendous. The little 250-pound section that Bus and Ed took off was 30 feet away from the center of gravity. And if you figure 250 times 30, you get a moment of force of around 7,500 pounds. By moment of force, I mean the pendulum motion, the driving up and down of the stern and the bow when the boat is in the water. Their little change makes quite a difference compared with Weatherly's 1958 performance. Ed Bainbridge checked out every piece of Weatherly's hardware and used an X-ray machine to examine her fittings. He sent back 8 out of 10 pieces of hardware that came from some of the manufacturers. Ed's personal joy were the coffee grinders, the high-speed winches used to control the jibs and spinnakers. He designed their interiors, and they never once had a breakdown all summer long.
Below decks, a 12-meter is something of a paradox. To reduce weight is a very free interpretation of the so-called luxury accommodations that are called for under the rules of the International Yacht Racing Union. For example, the head is supposed to be enclosed.
Right, so we put up a curtain, which weighs about as little as anything. And our dining accommodations are supposed to include things like cutlery for 6. We kept nothing but plastic spoons and knives, and that seemed to satisfy the rule. By the time the boats were ready to get wet, they were nothing but racing machines. In fact, Bus Mossbacker called Weatherly a 67-foot emery board.
There is a complex formula for measuring in a racing yacht. The length and width of the boat, sail area, and freeboard are all computed, added, divided by 2.37, and the answer has to be 12 meters, or else the boat is not a 12.
We had to push Easterner up a little bit to make her dimensions balance out. Bob Blumenstock here was official measurer for all the major yachting organizations. When Bob put Easterner on the scales, he decided she was a little bit heavy. So there was one final weight reduction session, and she lost another 700 pounds. We cut into her beautiful mahogany and ripped off everything else we could lay our hands on, even the cockpit. By the time we were done, she was almost ready to go.
It's a great day when one of these boats goes out to start the season. But before the boat gets out on the water for its spring tune-up, the mast has to be stepped with a bit of appropriate ceremony. This is always a nervous process, one that nobody enjoys until it's over. Fitted out with all its spreaders and stays in place, and with the hull standing by in the water, the mast is hoisted into position. But there's always the chance that it might slip on the hoist and tear down through the hull of the boat. So the onlookers watch and wait.
Like this tense individual, Chandler Hovey, owner of Easterner and one of the grand old men of yacht racing, was tremendously concerned. He eased his nerves by doing crossword puzzles all summer long.
There's a sailing tradition that when you step a mast, you put a silver dollar under it for luck.
We put about 5 silver dollars under the mast step of Easterner, but this season, it just didn't seem to work for us.
The 1962 observation trials got underway fairly late. But by July 1st, the 4 American boats, Weatherly, Columbia, Easterner, and Nefertiti, were all in Newport. Nefertiti, the last arrival, had come down from Marblehead, Massachusetts. Designed by sailmaker Ted Hood, she was completely new from hull shape to sail plan to the details of her construction. She was also radically wide in the beam, but 500 pounds lighter than her rivals. She was rumored to be very fast in high winds. Of the 4 American boats, Nefertiti was definitely the most glamorous.